Mavi fonda ortada podcast 5. bölüm The In-Between belgeseli Nöroçeşitlilik ve yaratıcı işbirlikleri yazıyor. Sağda yuvarlak içerisinde üstte moderatör Damla Durman ve konuşmacılardan Elif Simge Fettahoğlu ve Byron Vincent'ın görselleri. Sol üst köşede British Council logosu, en altta sosyal medya linkleri. Devamında ekran ikiye bölünüyor. Solda konuşmadan görüntüler ve çeşitli görseller. Sağda işaret dili tercümanı. Sol üst köşede British Council logosu.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Damla Durman. This is a podcast series launched with the support of the British Council, exploring accessibility in the arts through bridges and possibilities. In this series, we will discuss how to integrate accessibility into artistic production, creative tools for inclusive art, and collaborations between the UK and Turkey from the perspective of artists, academicians, and directors. And today, my guests are Buron Vincent. He is a neurodivergent writer, performer, broadcaster, DJ, and activist. Hello, Byron. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm so happy to see you. And Elif Simge Fettahoğlu. She is a researcher, architect, and academic in the urban design department at the Technical University of Munich. Hi, Elif. Hello.
Hi. And I'm also an occasional artist.
I would love to share your project a little bit. You created a documentary, supported for the documentary you created together for The In-Between at the Unlimited International Open Award 2024. This documentary, which focuses on Istanbul, explores how neurodivergence, specifically ADHD, affects two artists as they investigate the impact of the city on themselves. From the council estates of northern England to Istanbul, they look at how neurodivergence intersects with the city's landscapes, culture, and socioeconomic environment. In this episode, we will discuss how the city affects our neurodivergency. So welcome again. And Byron, this year I had a chance to meet you at the Unlimited Festival and experience your amazing project, also Disco Neurotico. As someone with ADHD who lives in Istanbul, works in cultural and art management, and explores different art disciplines, I was deeply moved to learn about your film and collaborations with Elif Simge. The first thing I'm curious about is when and how did you discover your neurodivergence, and how has the environment you live in influenced it?
It's been an unusual journey towards discovering my neurodivergence. Obviously, it's always been there. And when you get diagnosed, me and Elif are both late diagnosed. And when you get diagnosed and you look back through your life through the lens of that diagnosis, it all seems so blatantly obvious. But, we come from, certainly me, I'm a bit older and I come from a generation where there were very narrow views of what neurodivergence was and what it looked like and how it manifested. And those have changed, thankfully, and broadened, and understanding has broadened and is continuing to broaden. So it's been a long journey, and it's involved misdiagnoses, and it's involved a lot of struggle and a lot of masking and a lot of shame and pretending to be something that I'm not. And only at this age now am I becoming more comfortable to be authentic in my neurodivergence. So yeah, it's been a real journey for sure. But the diagnosis itself and the journey since that diagnosis has been emotional and enlightening. And one of the things that I've certainly found out about myself as a neurodivergent person is that I really enjoy the company of other neurodivergent people, especially neurodivergent artists. And so that's why it was such a joy to work with Ellie.
For me, it is also, as Brian said, it is a late diagnosis for me as well. And sort of this is very much common, especially in women, because women were not even considered to be able to be ADHD, you know? So this comes at a time, sort of, I was diagnosed at the age of 35. And so I recall reading about ADHD 15 years ago and writing to Ekşi Sözlük actually about my ADHD, and I was struggling, but I was never diagnosed. There were a lot of misdiagnosis processes, you know, chronic depression and being sort of going through there. And for me, this sort of the diagnosis and how I discovered myself, much like Brian did, like you come to a point in your life where you say, okay, I'm a pretty much adult now. And you begin questioning everything, every struggle you went through in this process in a different lens. And you learn yourself. But there is a question which we might address. How much of my character that I know of is a result of my neurodivergency, and how much it is I am, which was my main question after diagnosis, actually, you know. And this project actually helped me to discover some other aspects to that, which was quite exciting.
The whole discussion around identity and neurodivergence. My diagnosis is autism and ADHD, and there is, I guess, a backlash at the moment of people against people, because there's a lot of people online on social media who are presenting their diagnoses as elements of their identity, and a lot of people in the medical profession are saying that that's a terrible thing. And I understand why that's being said, but it's kind of like so much of who I am, well, everything about who I am has been informed by my neurodivergence. My entire life, in a neurotypical world, my neurodivergence has been the predominant defining factor in terms of every decision I make, in terms of my career, in terms of how I socially interact, where I go, why I go there, and why I do what I do. So how can we not express that as part of our identities? It's kind of ridiculous to suggest that and diminishing, I would argue, to suggest that we shouldn't be communicating our the neurodivergent or forefronting the neurodivergent elements of our character after so many years of repressing them.
Exactly, I totally agree with that. And I will also say, like, there is a very physical thing about neurodivergency as well. Sort of, it is wired in our brains, and as a woman, especially after the age of 35, this became more debilitating. Like, I'm gonna connect the dots. I promise. Sort of, it has become more. Sort of, this is the first time I realized it was a kind of a disability for me, let's say. And those are the things, like, very physical, very biological things that create you as you are. Sort of, this is not just a character trait, this is not just a sort of personality thing. It is how we are wired in a way. And that is why it needs to, sort of, from my perspective, it needs to be identified at the first stage. Because, yeah, I will not be performing this way and that way, because I learned through the hard course, right? And that is why it is such a big part of the personality. And I think it is also a very neurotypical way of looking at things, what doctors sort of say, in a way. I don't want to sort of denounce people as neurotypical, neurodivergent, but I think, yeah, there is a kind of a thing about being underrepresented in sort of, there was an article that says nothing about us without us. And I think that also applies to sort of that kind of research, I would say. As you see, how you speak is very much related to your neurodivergency.
This is kind of funny that the friends that I've kind of kept around me over the years, many of whom have gotten a recent diagnosis. And I think in life we do have a tendency to gravitate towards each other because there is an innate understanding there, and there's a maybe not a complete lack of masking, but just maybe a slightly more accepting and slightly more relaxed atmosphere around our fellow neurodivergents. So even before we knew we were neurodivergents, we found each other anyway, because there was just this spidey sense that this was our tribe, and since being diagnosed, I've actively sought that out, and there is definitely something cathartic and beautiful about that.
Totally agree about that. It's you begin to sense the sort of points that connect you to these people, and those are very much related to the neurodivergent traits, and actually how you suffered through and how you created this persona resonates very much with how they have suffered and how they created these personas alongside a lot of things. So yeah, this tribe is very much valid, and valid, I mean, in the sense that very much there.
So I'd been thinking about the notion of place and space um, in the context of neurodivergence for a long time, and also I'd been mulling over kind of making something psychogeographical, and these things came together when the British Council put out this award with Unlimited. I had a Turkish flatmate for a while. Hey, Arda, and they put a call out for our Turkish artists. That's how I was introduced to Elif, and we met, and immediately I was kind of impressed with Elif's amazing spicy brain and knowledge, and as a person that is interested in a cursory way in all the things that Elif is an expert in, it was a privilege to have her on board. And so yeah, I really wanted to I really wanted to explore how we interact with our environments. The reason it's called the in-between is because I think that a lot of neurodivergent people, certainly myself, occupy this liminal space between the neurotypical world and the neurodivergent world, and they do feel quite separate to me. They do feel like their own entities, but we can't exist entirely in the neurodivergent space because that's just not allowed. We are not allowed to do that. And we can't exist entirely in the neurodivergent space because we're not in the neurotypical space because we're not neurotypical. So we end up in this kind of hinterland, and so that's what really interests me about the places that we occupy. Sometimes we're held in safety in those spaces, and other times we have to contort ourselves quite uncomfortably in order to fit in. And Istanbul is such an amazing city, and Elif has got such a phenomenal knowledge of the place in terms of culture and history that I was very, very fortunate, I feel, to find her and be privileged to work with her.
I'm researching on Istanbul for tens of years now, and I discovered my neurodivergency, and I was also into the similar themes with Brian. Okay, how do we in the urban spaces move around as neurodivergence? And then the call popped up. Sometimes you have to believe in the fate, and we had a little bit of a test run, and I was quite nervous about how this was going to be. And then we began talking with Brian, and we resonated so much on similar subjects that I felt, again, blessed, because this perspective, and again, this is my city, Istanbul, we're talking about, which I think is a little bit of neurodivergent city in itself. And it just felt a very great experience to be talking about my perspective with a perspective that is resonating so much. So that is, I think, the charm of this journey in a way. and maybe sort of the liminalities we talked, and maybe we're going to be talking a little bit more, but there is also a kind of a way in liminality that sometimes those liminal spaces that we connect ourselves to, they are not 100% sure that we're going to be finding that liminal space as in the way that we imagine it to be, right? So that was also an experience from my perspective. Istanbul, sort of, I had all of these liminal spaces in betweenness and all of these sort of choreographies on how I feel, or stories in how I move around the city. And this was a perfect opportunity to dissect and look from a different perspective, in a way. What makes those spaces? How reliable are these spaces? In terms of reliable, I mean, um, sort of, as neurodivergence, we know how difficult it is to be in the flow, or be in the zone, or be sort of be sometimes. And sometimes those places exactly are not as you imagine it to be. That's what I mean. I know this is a very long rooted description, but that was also one of the themes I think we discovered.
How did you, decide to creating a documentary film in Istanbul?
The challenging the challenging conditions were mostly legal. There's a lot of permitting, so we had fixers, but even with fixers, the systems of permits are quite complex. So a lot of boring stuff like that my neurodivergent brain does not have any interest in or cope with very well. So fortunately, we had a team with us who could take that stuff on board. This is the kind of hilarious thing, is that we were certainly led by me and Elif, a neurodivergent team. So like, I think mine and Elif's perspective is, well, why can't we just do this here right now? And there's obviously there's legal loopholes that need to be jumped through, and we did, by the way, follow those legal uh, requirements. It wasn't easy for the shoot or for either of our neurotypes. but uh, it's been an evolving project. Even now, we're just at the beginning of the kind of at the editing stage, and there's it's changing as we go, and we are finding uh, new directions. It's certainly in the edit. I'm finding new directions every day, and so I quite enjoy that. I quite enjoy the fact that I really like the idea of sculpting something where it's this big block of data, or this big block of information and emotion and everything else that when and we've got a shout out to our DOP, actually. Matty Groves was fantastic. He's got some. I mean, it's a beautiful, beautiful city and it's so visually rich. It's a stunning, visually rich city, and he's captured it amazingly, I think. Especially with my autistic direction and proclivities, because I like the macro, I like detail and texture, and Istanbul is so rich in those things that it's impossible. It's everywhere. It's impossible to know where to frame. But our DOP did a fantastic job. So we've got lots and lots and lots of material to work with, and now the job is to sort of chisel it into the perfect form, which will take time and discussion between me and Elif. But I think we're strong collaborators, and the end result, I hope, will be amazing.
We like to be in the flow, in a way, and then there were these discovering these moments, like, I've never been so much on the pavement of Istanbul, laying on the pavements of Istanbul. Like, we were trying to define this liminal spaces, and those are the best places, and to convey the idea. That was great. And sort of one of the challenge was, I think, to convey how our conversation goes, actually, because we derail, we find these connections, and then those connections create another stories, but then it goes to the point, but goes through a lot of different directions, much like my speech now. But yeah, that alongside going through Istanbul, I think what resonated me most was the personal experiences of Brian relating to those sort of, or came out at our discussions at those points, let's say. And that also showed a kind of a perspective that was very close to me in a totally different geography. You are grown in London and I'm in Istanbul, and we found these similarities, these differences, and Istanbul was the perfect background for that, or Istanbul pavements were the perfect background for that in a way. And yeah, and I have to say that one thing that we took very much care has been not to be stuck in the traffic jams of Istanbul, because I know for a fact that for a neurodivergent person, those traffic jams equals anxiety attacks or even more. I recall, like in the heart of Mecidiyeköy, having panic attacks, physical panic attacks, because I'm stuck in the traffic. And that was also one of the challenges: how to navigate in Istanbul without stumbling to these obstacles that would trigger our worst selves.
We are from different places, obviously, and from different cultures, and but there are similarities that are just obvious, and certainly, so we had long discussions, for example, about how the ADHD parts of ourselves cope with stasis, or should I say, don't really cope with stasis, and how that manifests in well, specifically in Istanbul. It's a city of constant movement, but it's easy to become trapped within that movement, gridlocked in that movement, and how having that freedom of movement and that sort of physical restriction really impacts us, and it impacts us kind of viscerally. And that can be in a traffic jam, or it can be self-imposed. We talked about how we struggle to meditate, for example, as people with ADHD, how excruciating that can be, and moments of quiet and silence can be. They've got to be very, very specific for us to be able to relax and enjoy that silence. And I think we sort of broached the notion that maybe we don't ever experience silence because there's a lot of internal noise and tumult that neurodivergent people experience, and conditions have got to be kind of perfect to allow us to feel calm. But we went up the coast. And experienced a little bit of how other environments impact us, and yeah, hopefully that will be conveyed in the film.
Sort of, because in Istanbul, if you asked me before our shoot, the best places are the ferries. Best places for neurodivergent people are the ferries. That was my intention. And actually, sort of, I am such a ferry person that we got married in the ferry, in between Kadıköy and Beşiktaş. That is the level of ferry person I am. And sort of, we got the shooting permits and everything was great. We got the sort of most iconic ferries that are in service, sort of Paşabahçe Vapuru. It was magical. The weather was magical. And then, sort of, at the moment in the ferry, Brian asked me, "Oh, do you think this is a neurodivergent friendly environment?" Sort of, I think the question was around that because, memory problems. And that is the moment it fell around me. Like the whole idea of the ferry, I began sensing these sort of sounds of the ferry, sort of how it is not possible for people to, sort of, let's say, disabled people to move. So at one moment I realized it may not be as welcoming as for me as anyone practically. And yeah, Brian, thank you for that moment. No, no, it's good. But then it is one of the things that, sort of, from my perspective, those places are very much connected to my own memory. But seeing it from the eyes of Brian as well, or emphasizing with how Brian perceives, was very eye-opening from my perspective, in a way. And that is also the thing, like we fear rejection, right? That is one of the other themes that we struggle with so much. We fear rejection, and while we were walking, I could see that Brian was in tune with certain themes and certain environments, and then I would be very much in tune as well. But in the other times I was like, okay, okay, that kind of anxiety also comes, and also Istanbul can produce a lot of anxiety alongside its magical moments. But yeah, that's one of the things. The neurodivergent experience, in my opinion, is a kind of a not just navigation in the city, but it's a kind of a composition or a negotiation, sort of in between different scenes, in between different environments, in between different encounters, and that's hopefully something that we're going to convey.
Yeah, like the thing about urban planning and neurodivergence, I run a company called Disco Neurotico, and we put on events for neurodivergent people. And one of the things that I'm trying to do this year is find biophilic spaces, so spaces that have a lot of natural resources and are more, yeah, just generally more green and lots of flora and fauna, because there's a lot of research suggesting that neurodivergent people, our symptoms are reduced in those spaces. And so I think that I hear that, I listen to that research or I read that research, and I think, doesn't everybody feel better in those spaces? Surely everybody's life is improved when there is a natural water source present. We've spoken about being on the ferry. I calm down so much in Istanbul when I'm either on the bridges or on the ferry, or my feet are near the water. I can see the glisten, I can hear it. Everything about it sensorially just chills me out. I love being by or in water, and I love being in nature. When we did go the coast as well, just smelling the sea has a beneficial impact on me, and there's certainly something to be said for that biophilic experience, and so that's why this year I'm trying to put my events on in greener spaces, in spaces that are surrounded by nature, so people can have an indoor and an outdoor experience, and have that immediate sense of connection to the land, an immediate sense of connection to the self, and an immediate sense of well-being that comes by being in nature. So um, my utopia, if I was an urban planner, would certainly to involve more biophilic spaces in urban environments, and that can be done really easily. You know, it's a shame. I think that we prioritize economics over comfort and accessibility. But I think hopefully moving forward, it's just hasn't impacted us on our filming. We at least were able to go to some spaces that we wanted to spend some time in. As Elif mentioned, Galata Bridge was one of them, and what a space. Um, we spent a lot of time rolling around in the dirt on the floor, but that's art, folks. Yeah, I think my interaction with urban spaces is with a jaded eye at the moment, because the more research I do and the more I think about urban design, the more I wish we were with new builds and new properties. The more I wish we would consider what human beings actually need, rather than just basic functionality. More than that, I mean, what about well-being? What about creating a space that is pleasant to be in rather than just barely functional?
There is a lot of discussion about affective spaces and how cities could sort of be be tailored for difference, especially in feminist geographical feminist geographical theory, etc. But I will point out one thing, sort of how neurodivergent. Sort of, I will not say that not everyone. Sort of, for everyone, the city is a sensory and affective place, right? This is the basic, but for us, it is an existential condition. That is how I feel it portrays, because it is not just sort of at one moment, it's like a battlefield as well. Like at one moment you're at ease, you are calm, and everything is manageable. At the other moment, everything is overbearing and too much, and you feel like you cannot move. That also oscillates between these two directions. And what happens is that if you are in an environment that didn't account for the difference and just sort of normal, based on normal encounters, then you have no harbors, or no, then you don't have anchors that hold it to your place. Legibility is for every human being, like having a legible urban environment, but for neurodivergence, it is more than that. And effective qualities of the space and how it is sort of, it caters to everyone, because not every neurodivergence experience is the same, right? How I experience this place at a certain place and a time is rather different than how you experience, sort of that kind of a thing. So a space for difference, a space for multiplicity, while keeping it within certain guidelines. When you ask that question again in that fairy interview, it was too abstract of a concept, because also we are so much shaped by how we deal with our urban environment, is that it is also difficult to portray how we would operate in a neurodivergent friendly environment. That is also how I feel. Like I would probably feel unease at first. I would probably not know how to interact without that challenge. Do you also feel that way?
Yes, in this city we always need to calculate the time and the places, so also the architecture is affected, of course. uh, when I was in UK, I realized that the noise is much more, you know you know better. I don't distract about the noises or the architectural shapes, but in here I always put my headphones, because there are too much noises around me and too much conversations going on. Also, time blindness is a big issue, and I think it's a cultural attitude in here in Turkey. People always thinking like that. Oh, okay, it's true normal, but it's kind of like a domino effect. We affect each other and each other needings.
It applies to time blindness as well, which is one of the key elements of ADHD. You perceive time differently, and until the age of 35, when I was diagnosed, I knew that I had a problem with time, but sort of because everyone seemed to be doing quite well with it, but I couldn't. Like, if you tell me to be in the office at 9 a.m. at sort of every day, that would be equal for me. That would be equal to, I don't know, you will be sitting on an electric chair. That is how time blind I feel, if it makes sense. Because 9 a.m. could be a concept that is debilitating sometimes. No, it also applies to day to day things, like any events or organizations or anything. It could also apply waiting for the public transport, like for the buses to arrive. That is why that is one of the reasons why ferries have been such a big refuges for me, because you know that they're going to be on time. I don't. That is the most reliable thing, and I used ferry as a way to cope with the time blindness. Sort of, those are the things also that somewhat sort of with the diagnosis, and you just begin understanding yourself better, so you know how to cope with it. And that is a big step, I would say. And that is why sort of you can also then assess some I don't know, some negotiate you have more negotiation power over your relationships in that way. So you might say, okay, I might be late, but I will be hyper fixating on this. So I don't know, that kind of a negotiation. It gives you, knowing yourself gives you a big negotiation power, I believe, and that actually helps you to mature and move on and to be able to do things in a way.
When you feel, getting anxiety, or what do you do in general? How did you cope with that, the different elements?
The environment that we grow up in, especially for you as a student of architecture and a academic, um, uh, that it's a dialogue. It's reciprocal. We shape our environments, and our environment shapes us. But I think as neurodivergent people, we have a slightly diminished voice because we are a minority. So that dialogue is biased towards neurotypical needs and tastes. Um, but we do, that's the wider environment. We do also have the opportunity to create our own environments within our homes and stuff like that. And I think maybe, I was talking earlier about neurodivergence informing everything that I do and everything that I've done. I'm absolutely convinced that it's neurodivergence that led me into the arts. I mean, I know it is. And uh, I think a lot of neurodivergent artists are trying to create a space for themselves, psychologically and physically, that is habitable, that's tolerable, that's outside of kind of neurotypical constraints, and that one of the few places you can do that is within the arts, where there's less judgment about creating a separate bubble that is maybe uh, strange to neurotypical people, or seems a little off kilter, or doesn't make a lot of sense to the wider populace, but makes complete sense to us. So, I mean, I think most neurodivergent households, when you walk into them, this is just personal experience. I'm just, this is a generalization, but when you walk into them, you can kind of tell. Like, certainly my yeah. So my home, my wife is also autistic, so we've got two neurodivergent people in. So one of the little autistic traits that my wife has is she collects things, and so we have like collections of pebbles, or collections of wires, or rusty wires, or collections of broken wing mirrors, and these are things that she finds beautiful. She's also an artist, but to somebody who is neurotypical, like having a vast collection of broken car wing mirrors would probably seem quite insane. I tend to wear noise cancelling headphones, or ear defenders, or something that cancels out noise, because I'm negatively impacted by not necessarily loud noise, but complex noise. And I didn't know that about myself until my 40s. I didn't know this. So I would be like really uncomfortable, incredibly uncomfortable in environments, and thinking, what is wrong with me? Why can't I be? Why do I feel this way? And all it took was just a pair of headphones, and I'm fine. And who knew? And but that kind of immense growth over such a small thing, that like I'm suddenly enabled to be fully present in environments that I was pretty much psychologically excluded from, or physically excluded from in earlier life. And so, yeah, like learning these things about ourselves as neurodivergent people is it's an epiphany, and it's liberating, and I'm incredibly grateful it's happening.
I would um that is the other thing, right? I don't know if that happens to you, but I want to bring up one thing, because we are very capable, as you said, sort of, at least we believe we are capable of that. We produce, and what we produce has a lot of strong narrative, because that's how we think. So we connect the dots, we create narratives, and hopefully that is a very relevant narrative people will be engaged to. Otherwise, we are happy to produce whatever. But I also feel like there is a kind of an unreliability as well. So in order for me to produce something, it needs to be exciting. And for most of the time, in order for me to be hyper focused on something, either it needs to be very personal, so that it comes from a very heart, sort of it comes next to my heart in a way, or it should be something novel, technically challenging, or this or that, sort of it should pose a challenge. So I also realized that coupled with the unreliable memory issues with the ADHD and sort of neurodivergency, I realized that I tend to forget how I produce. And each time, this discovery it's kind of a knowingly forgetting thing. So each time, whatever creative process I try to instigate a learning process from start, from scratch. I don't know if it happens to you, and I wanted to bring that to the table. Yeah.
I work with a lot of projects, so that's why I always need to find the new solutions and the new ways of communication. And sometimes, if I'm working with my own, you know, own people, and we're understand our nature and our the language and usage of the tools, but otherwise I really had times when I was working with a company and the different communities, because they created a structure, even in dialogues, the way that you uh doing a project. So sometimes I really need to open my hyper focus mode and to see and search to the way how can I connect with with the different companies and the um, different workers actually.
Everyone feels a certain connection with the landscape, and everyone feels a certain connection with the urban environments. But again, it is such an existential condition for us that when it becomes in tune, like you described, like we might also say this is a Kantian sublime thing. We are between Ave and sort of our rational minds, whatever. No, it's just this feeling of I belong to this place, and this feels in tune with my emotions, and that is an overwhelming experience.
When you're working on a project, as you can imagine, I need to also writing lots of emails, foundings. I need to find the project partners. It created the whole program, so just one person needs to do everything. So that's what I need to always carry lots of things in just in a one basket. And it means sometimes I didn't feel like what am I doing,
We talked about this in our film. That we can go through. We talked about being quite good in a crisis, but then 6 months later crying in the supermarket. About it, and I think that's another very common neurotypical thing. And as for what you were saying, Damla, that was incredibly relatable. I also have and constantly have multiple projects going, partly to sate that ADHD fix for something new, and partly it's. I mean, I can't really describe. Uh, it's related to time blindness, I think, but I just it's very much related to time blindness in that I never really know how much time a project is going to take. So I'll just take on way too much, assuming that I can do it all, and then end up working every hour that I'm awake. And so there's multiple reasons why we are destined to burn out um, if we don't look after ourselves. And that most I've been very conscious about trying to create elements of self-care over the last few years, but that's one that I still haven't got a handle on. So if either of you have got any advice about how we rein in our constant acceptance of extra tasks and extra work, and because I'm like a puppy, I'm like, a new thing over there, go get that, and so it's very difficult for me to say, oh no, I'm not going to do that project, or I physically and actively I generate my own projects. So if I have another idea, I'm like, oh, shiny new thing, I must put some energy into that. But it gets to the point where it's almost physically impossible to. So if you've got any advice, either of you, about how we manage that within ourselves, then please do let me know.
If it's too little, I can't function. If it's too much, I can function, but I will go into a burnout. So this is a sort of very, very, very fine balance. Yeah, in my 40 years of life, I couldn't find a solution. But there is also the knowledge that you wouldn't change any moment of that thing that led you to burnout, right? Because how it felt.
Being lesser, or a feeling of being judged, or experiences at school even, and formative experiences where we've had to mask and hide our neurodivergence in order to appear to be different or fit in or whatever it is. And so I'm kind of exploring that. So before reacting to somebody for doing something that I've asked them to do anyway, I will take a moment to investigate why I feel the way I feel about that. And I think that's incredibly important in collaboration for us neurodivergent folk. As much as we require accommodations for other people, we also have a responsibility to investigate our own emotional reactions to things.
That was wonderful. Actually, I feel seen and heard through your project. Really, first time I met with you, and I, recognize what is going on, around the projects, around our community. I feel very grateful, and also thank you for having your time and sharing your experiences. It was amazing.
Well, yeah, the last words have got to be, come and see the film when it's out. The in between, it's hopefully should be ready by the autumn of this year. I don't know. It'll start at film festivals, and then hopefully we'll find a streaming platform for it. But keep your eyes peeled, and yeah, we'd love to hear your feedback on it.
Let's do the film. Let's let's